Hi, this is Paul. I want to do a video on Chesterton's fence and Christian objections to same-sex marriage. Obviously, this has been a topic that I've dealt with quite a bit, and those of you who are worried that this is going to take over the channel, if you've been watching long enough, you know that no single thing takes over the channel. Sometimes people worry that Jordan Peterson talk is going to take over the channel, or Christianity talk is going to take over the channel, or not enough Christianity talk is going to take over the channel. But this obviously is something that I've been thinking about, and for the most part, my channel is about what I've been thinking about. It gives me a chance to think out loud and do some talking. This video isn't going to be quite as rambly as the 3-hour video on marriage equality. And hopefully it's a little bit more linear, a little bit more organized. Actually, it's going to pull together a lot of what I've been talking about ever since I started making videos on YouTube. So I've been watching the debate in the Christian Reformed Church on this topic for a very long time now. I was at Calvin Seminary in the 1980s. I remember our pastoral care class with Mel Hugan. It was a topic that many students were eager to talk about. If you read a book like A Severe Mercy, going all the way back to the 1950s and 60s, it was a subject that many people were eager to talk about. This subject has been on the mouths of Christians, Protestant, Catholic, for a very long time now, and it isn't going away. If you're curious about the Christian Reformed Church's position and some history of this topic, here are a couple of links. I can put them down in the show notes. If you just Google homosexuality, Christian Reformed Church position, it'll take you right there. There are a lot of citations to synodical reports, but unfortunately that page doesn't have links to the synodical reports. I can understand that, given that the synodical reports themselves aren't easy to wade through. But if you're looking for links to those, you can just Google Synodical Resources, Christian Reformed Church, and find a long history of probably way more reading than any of you care to do. Now, moral debates get complex quickly, to the surprise of many Americans. Why to the surprise of many Americans? Again, this really interesting book by Christian Smith, where he came up with the notion moralistic therapeutic deism. The young Americans that he surveyed in the 1990s pretty much all imagined that morality was self-evident. And they believed that they somehow inherited this from their parents, and it's self-evident, and that's that. And by looking at the polarization of comments on my videos and in general on this topic, it's pretty easy to see that playing out. On one side, of course, same-sex marriage. This is marriage equality. How dare you challenge this, you bigot? And the other side, haven't you ever read the Bible? Isn't the Bible clear that this is against God's law, you godless humanist? So off the polarization goes. And many people are done with talking about it. And in the Christian Reformed Church, partly because we had 25 years of this kind of battling over women in office, Pauline versus this verse, and now there's some of that, but not near the level of it with respect to same-sex marriage, partly because there isn't as much biblical material, frankly. And so people have made up their minds, and they're done talking, and they want to yell or walk away. And that's where a lot of people are. But I want us to back up and ask the question, what is morality? Because that's come up in a number of the videos that I've looked at. And the question, does nature answer the question of morality? What do we mean by nature? Well, what is the source, history, and reason behind the resistance to same-sex love, romanticism, sexuality? And that's where we're going to get into Chesterton's fence. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Chesterton's fence, Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying have actually incorporated it into their book, which I found extremely interesting. It's a notion by G.K. Chesterton, who said if you come across a field and you see a fence and it just seems to be in the way and you don't see a reason for the fence having built there, you shouldn't just take it down, because at some point someone expended energy, money, resources, and attention to put the fence there. And maybe you shouldn't take down the fence until you understand the reason why the fence was put up. And I think this is actually a very helpful question to ask when Christians debate this question of same-sex marriage. And this video will be exactly about that, Chesterton's fence and same-sex marriage. Can it help us here? And what do we mean by help? Chesterton's fence idea. So let's dive in. So I talked about morality a bit in a video that I almost didn't publish because I thought it was even too rambly for my channel, entitled Progressive Christianity and the Generation of Luxury Moral Religion. I was quite surprised by how well that video did, how many of you watched it and said you appreciated it. It's not uncommon for when I finish a video and I sleep on it, and it's like I shouldn't post this because it's too rambly. I go out on too many limbs, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Pretty much the whole channel is like that. Should Christian churches affirm and celebrate same-sex unions, relationships, and sexuality? That's the moral question. Well, what is morality? Well, it's what we should and shouldn't do individually and collectively. That sounds pretty simple. But very quickly you have to ask the question, what we should or shouldn't do to what ends? And so with this question, especially within a Christian community, people, in fact, many people in the comments will say, well, the Bible's clear on it. And that's their comment. And okay, you certainly find that argument convincing, and a whole group of other people don't find it convincing. And at this point in the debate, not a lot of people are willing to sit down and sort of wade through everything that goes into the question of how the Bible speaks and what it says and how we regard it, etc., etc. I had Clay Leibolt on my channel a while ago. Clay has a much more of an affirming, open position than I do, and Clay is much more pessimistic about as to whether or not the Bible can say anything at all, and so therefore shouldn't have anything to say in terms of the morality. Many others of you believe completely the opposite, that the Bible in fact does speak. It's God's guide and again, there's a lot of framing that goes into this. Misery, deliverance, gratitude, that's more my framing. Obedience is something that we give back to God out of response for the generosity that he's shown us. That's very much my Reformed perspective, molded by the Heidelberg Catechism. Others have much more of a transactional posture where, well, this is God's law, we should obey it, and if we obey it, we'll be blessed, and if we don't obey it, well, we'll be punished. You can very much find that in the book of Deuteronomy. So there's lots here that makes this way more complex than just, does the Bible say yes or no? Now, if you're in that camp, I'm happy to leave you there. That's fine. I don't actually think the question about, at least in a standard Protestant framework or a Roman Catholic framework or an Orthodox framework, I don't think this is a close call when it comes to biblical material. As I mentioned to Nick, who I had on the channel a little while ago, there's not one single same-sex couple represented in the Bible in a long-term, monogamous really isn't the right word, a long-term committed relationship. There's not one. And we're going to get into the argument because people say, well, Paul didn't know any at that time. And there's a lot of reason to believe there were plenty of them around, and that idea was not in any way unusual for Paul. There's just simply very little material about this. And I think, frankly, the biggest, and I'll get to that at the end of the video, the biggest proof text of this is Genesis 1, not any of the prohibitions and any of the other passages. But then again, many will say, well, what does that have to do with morality? Morality is about what is healthy, what is life-giving, what is profitable, what works. And they have a real point, because that, for many of us, is how we construct our moralities. Some of you will say, well, science shows us that same-sex marriage is not wrong. Science can't show you whether anything is right or wrong. It might be helpful or unhelpful if you're attempting to achieve a certain goal, but should is the line of demarcation between the manifest image and the scientific image. And I've made plenty of videos on that. Science might be good at saying what is on a physical level, but not what ought to be as a goal. Is the speed of light good or bad? There's the fine-tuning argument that basically says that life as we know it would be impossible unless a whole bunch of little constants weren't set just exactly right in the universe as they are. And that sort of begets the multiverse thesis and all of these kinds of cosmological discussions about the existence of God or evidence for there being purpose in the construction of the universe. All of that is too far afield. We're talking about morality. But morality, the point I'm trying to make, is not a simple thing. C.S. Lewis, in The Problem of Pain, begins the book with a really interesting assertion about morality. He basically says morality for humanity is commonly an intuition. It's something that we feel. Now, for Lewis, after his great war with Owen Barfield, he believes that we can, in fact, derive true knowledge from our intuitions. And most Americans, on that score, pretty much align with Lewis. Now, they'll differ from Lewis because Lewis is a little bit more skeptical about how high a definition we can necessarily gain from our moral intuitions. They are guides to us. They are important for us. And in fact, I don't like the term objective morality, but that seems to be a term that many of you like, so I'll use it with reservations. Adam Friended, of course, likes this term. C.S. Lewis would say our moral intuitions actually give us knowledge about the objective morality that the universe possesses. Now, of course, Lewis will go a step further and say the universe has this because of its creator. And as I mentioned in a previous video, if you read Lewis in his book Mere Christianity has beneath it a number of arguments for the existence of God. One of those arguments is that if you believe that there is a moral law, it is not unreasonable to imagine that there is a moral lawgiver. And so Lewis really likes that. Part of the evidence that he points to at the end, in the appendix to his book, The Abolition of Man, is what he calls the Tao. And what he says is that these moral intuitions, even though they are fallible, even though they are subject to all sorts of things, cultures and winds of change and personal biases and everything, generally speaking, in the broadest possible range, they don't differ as much as we imagine they might. Some really basic elements, law of reciprocity, Jonathan Haidt, who I'm about to bring in, talks about don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat. These are common things of the Tao, Lewis says. He goes on in The Problem of Pain to say that the great contribution of the Hebrews was wedding moral intuitions with numinous intuitions. And again, I think if you're curious about Lewis's argument, read the book. Our moral intuitions are in some ways dead reckoning. They're sort of like a compass rather than a high-resolution GPS. They're sort of like, okay, there's the sun, so that's about west, and moss grows on the north side of trees, and all of this stuff, rises in the east, sets in the west, and magnetic north versus true north. I mean, these are all fairly low resolution guides. That's sort of what intuitions are. Our intuitions give us knowledge, but they are fallible, subject to BSing, biases, history, etc. Some of this gets, I think, I would love to have seen a conversation between Ian McGilchrist and C.S. Lewis on some of these things because, of course, our intuitions, McGilchrist would say, come from our bicameral mind. And, there's a lot of skepticism. You can't really cut these things down the middle quite as much as sort of a bicameral mind imaginary would be. But generally speaking, there's a degree of opponent processing that's going on between mapped territory and unmapped territory, between, sort of global bringing in things through symbolism, filtering them through intuition that part of the mind does, and the other part of the mind is sort of this accountant that wants to take things and nail them down into little dogmatic specific listicles so we can sort of nail some things down. And the way the brain works is sort of back and forth with these processes. And this basically is how we can deal with combinatorial explosiveness in the world. Again, this is all John Vervaeke type terms. Jonathan Haidt goes on from here with his evolutionary psychology and talks about moral taste buds or moral foundations theory. And he basically says that there are certain foundations that now he's writing in the academy, he's an atheist. He basically says that, we can find these moral foundations, and they're sort of foundations, they're sort of canals. I kind of think of them as troughs because our moral, let's say, imagine a moral question rains down from on high, and these sort of gather the elements of the moral questions and guide us in our thinking. They are biases, intuitions, things like that. And there's again, they're in clusters that are sort of opponent processing each other. Care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation. My wife and I have been watching some past seasons of Survivor, and it is an interesting show in terms of psychology and many of these things. The people are very righteous when they've been blindsided or backstabbed, or someone has lied to them and they're voted off the island and they didn't see it coming and they're not in the in-group. I mean, this is all human behavior that we're very familiar with. Now this operates below the surface, but reliably shows up, Haidt says, across cultures and time. And this is, of course, the real hope of using nature or something like evolutionary psychology to attempt to guide our way, but as we'll get into and as we continue to talk about, guide our way into what? It's usually into more dead reckoning and more better or worse and more assumptions about what is good and what is bad, because nature can't answer this question for us. Human beings are malleable culturally within these grooves. Now, there's an enormous amount of circularity that goes on with this. And circularity in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. Circles can be vicious, or they can be virtuous spirals where we're actually sort of making progress. And I have to thank the spiral dynamics people for that kind of imagery. So a vicious circle is sort of, or you can think of a vicious funnel or a virtuous spiral, something like that. But again, all of this is imagining that there really is a moral axis to the universe, that there is somehow a better and worse. And it isn't just all simply instrumental towards some mediated good that we're looking for. Now, most human beings sort of work their morality through some means that have been well known to thinkers for thousands of years. We all receive a first draft from our parents, and Christian Smith notes that, and all these interview with young people. Well, I think I learned right and wrong from my daddy and my mama. Well, that's very true. And your brothers and your sisters and the movies and the TV, you were a little sponge and you absorbed a first draft and you made an entire world map, low resolution, but bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, you improved it. And there's a ton of stuff that went into there. Someone did something you didn't like, you get it's bad. Something came in that you liked, that's good. And you compared notes with others. And you were doing this without with very little conscious cognition. And you compared notes, and you had fights as toddlers, and all of this stuff went in to build that map inside of you, and it's right there in you, and you only bump into it when, let's say, you get married, and you suddenly sit down next to someone that you've promised to love for the rest of your life, and then you decide that they're completely wrong about a whole bunch of things that are important to you, but you never had time to ask them because they fascinated you in some way, and so you decided to jump right into it. So that's certainly part of it. And there's personal experience, which is, of course, part of that, too. So the mappings continue to get updated with personal experience. And there's a lot going on with those experiences. Sometimes what works, and we pay attention, and we take things in intuitively. And so our intuitive capacities and our reasonable capacities continue to grow and develop, and all of this continues to be put into us. But again, most of this is not conscious at all for us. We're simply being molded and formed and shaped by everything that's around us. And then there's this question of authority. Well, somehow authority comes into the picture. And what is authority? Somehow some ideas and some notions and some books and some people and some things just seem to have gravitas, and they seem right, and other things seem less right. And you can think of Rene Girard in this. We not only borrow our desires, we borrow our authorities. And human beings have been known to be very malleable in these things as well. And I've mentioned before, I think it was Young Life for a while, they had the cool kid strategy of evangelizing public schools. And they knew very well that if they could go into the school and look around and say, okay, who's captain of the football team? Who's head cheerleader? Who's the musician that musicians not so much. Sorry, musicians. I know you didn't get much love in high school necessarily. Maybe a singer. But who in the class does everyone look up to? And if they suddenly become a Christian, well, Christianity suddenly is popular. Just like if they wear a certain sneaker, or they wear certain clothing, or they like certain music, suddenly everybody jumps on board. You might call that fad or fashion. It's got an element of authority to it. It's an outweighing of some over others. And this is inherited, of course, because you picked that stuff up from your parents as well, and you picked it up from your community as well. Arche, as I've mentioned before, means first or foremost or highest. It's this Greek word that seems to have all of that in there, and it's all over the place. Architect, archetype, it's all this first things, all this head stuff. When you hear Christians, and I was listening to Justin Brierley and Mark Driscoll, listening to that classic episode as Justin Brierley, and arche, head of the family. That's all arche talk in Greek. First, foremost, writings that are old. Oh, this is old. Or writings that are popular. Imagine there's no religion. On and on and on. Implicit, and this also gets into my video about hagiography, because this is all of what goes in. And then once we sort of get enamored and the spirit of these things begins to move in us, and then we begin to speak, and it's sort of like talk to someone who has found a new author or has met a new romantic partner, and they're looking at their arche through rose-colored glasses, and they can do no wrong, and they're doing everything right, and they're the key of understanding to the world, yada yada yada. That's authority. And because somehow this person seems to know and be able to manage the world from the inside out. They're the author of the story that is swirling around us. Now, there's a long history to a lot of this stuff, and if you go all the way back in my 3+ years of video making, you'll find this. Great courses online, and it was a good one. I remember I listened to this thing 3 or 4 times. Philip Carey, Philosophy and Religion in the West. One of the things that happens during the Renaissance is this turn to the text. You find people in Renaissance humanism renaming themselves in Latin, and digging up, and suddenly all this garbage around Rome is now highly prized and valuable, and bring out these statues and these beautiful statues, and find these beautiful texts brought in from through the Crusades, and learn to manage Latin like Cicero, and learn the Greek of Plato, and Aristotle gets discovered. Oh my, this learning is so brilliant. We have to bring it into the church, even though the church says, no, you shouldn't read this. And good old young Aquinas gets at it and thinks, I bet you I can have the church fall in love with this. And yeah, Thomas did. He did exactly that. So you have this turn to the text. And so in the late Middle Ages, beginning of the modern period, if you're going to study physics, you read Aristotle, because that's how you'll learn physics. You'll learn it from the book. Now, you don't go out and drop things like Galileo and time, and all that stuff's going to come later. It's this turn to the text. Now, I'm going to talk about Two Worlds mythology and the mapping of it that isn't going to go away. This might be because of the bicameral mind. It's another way of saying it's because we're the breath of heaven and the stuff of earth. There's lots of ways of saying it, but this Two Worlds mythology mapped onto all kinds of things inside of us and outside of us is by no means going to go away. You can find it in Machu Picchu's book about creation. Now, this turn to the text is in many ways turning towards the upper register of that, the triplet of heaven, spirit, and mind. And even written words. I mean, written words are funny. I mean, the text on the page, or the indentations in the dried mud, or whatever, the toner that adheres because of tiny little electrical charges to the page as it goes through your laser printer or your photocopier. The words really aren't on the page. You can burn the books, but you can't burn the ideas. And we're going to talk about this two worlds mythology a little bit more. But the Renaissance humanism, this love of language, this love of the classics, this reappropriation of the classical world, this has everything to do with heaven and spirit and mind. And it's an elevated world. And so we still love the Renaissance paintings because they just seem so crisp and clear and in some ways sort of beyond decay, even if they manifest a witness to decay within it. Now, the Protestant Reformation is, of course, very much born into that. Young Martin Luther is reading Erasmus like crazy. And there is Erasmus now with this new powerful tool called the printing press. And you can lay a Greek text, even if it's not a very good one, and the Latin Vulgate and Erasmus's notes next to each other. And suddenly, this text, which has sort of descended from the heavens, now seems much more of earth, subject to decay, but if subject to decay, also subject to improvement. And the Protestant Reformation is born. To the text, and away from such inherited authoritative structures that were clearly corrupt, like the papacy, like the priesthood, like indulgences. All of these things they're the corruptions. They're the things of earth, flesh, matter, instead of the things of heaven, spirit, mind. And so in some ways the Protestant Reformation sort of expands this gulf and tries to get on the right side of history, if you will. History is bending towards heaven, spirit, and mind rather than earth, flesh, and matter. Now, Luther believed that, if we can just and Protestants have followed Luther for a long time, Gideons especially, if we can just get the Bible in front of them, we'll put them in all those hotel rooms, and some poor person will go to this lousy conference and they'll have a terrible time, and they'll be missing or cheating on their wife, and they'll be doing things that are getting them into trouble, and they've made their life a mess, and they open the drawer and there's if in Utah it's the Book of Mormon, but if you're most other places, it's the Gideon Bible. Not so much anymore. I don't think hotels put them in like they used to. That would just kind of be putting the hotel on the wrong side of history. So open up that Gideon Bible and you read the Gospel of John, and the light comes in and we sing Wesley's How Can It Be? Bing, bang, boom. Luther was certainly hoping that maybe if he makes a real point about this, and the church really in some ways, if they had ignored him, they probably would have been better off, but they didn't. And he was just assuming that perhaps some rival edifice will arise out of reason and the text and will purify the church. But even Luther and Karlstadt couldn't really get on the same page. And on we go. And certainly Luther and Zwingli couldn't get on the same page with respect to the Lord's Supper. So after all this mess in very broad terms, there's really a turn to this word nature. We could say it's a turn to empiricism. Suddenly, instead of reading Aristotle to find out about physics, go out there and look at the natural world, because it seems everybody reading Aristotle has sort of got some similar ideas. But, if you can figure out and, suddenly telling time is a very important thing, and learning to do it more and more accurately, but measuring the speed of two falling bodies. Well, that's very important. And then, of course, at some point, Galileo is going to say, that discarded image, the stuff above the moon, is all supposed to be ether and of the heavenlies, but it certainly seems like the physics above and the physics below are working in the same way. And so suddenly that discarded image is demolished. And, it's rather proven by astronauts going to the moon, right? The same physics above and the same physics below. The math seems to work better. And the math can tell you a lot. Luther's experiment failed. People didn't agree on the text. The search for the objective, and I'll use scare quotes on that without blushing. Now, regularity in the testable world is a way of doing theology, because you are learning to know and love God number one, this God who doesn't change, this God who is reliable, this God who works through gravity, and the God who works through all of the natural processes. The great, the spheres in the sky. Well, we won't talk about what's above the moon anymore, but God is working all over the place. So we're going to do natural theology and see all of the ways that God works in the world, because, of course, this is the hand of God that's working among us and causing all of this. But then, of course, deism creeps in, and in some ways you have nature, this thing that goes on its own. It's no longer God doing it. It's nature. And maybe now we can have the truth, which doesn't change, and upon these truths we can achieve certainty and construct mastery of our physical world to our own ends. But don't ask us where we're getting our wanting from, or where we're getting our oughts from. And in some ways, we're basically now at the end of this stage of the story, as we see increasingly modernity's sun starting to set. But let's deal with this word nature. And I know I mentioned it a little bit in a previous video, and a fair number of you had comments on it. So I'm going to read for you a little bit from C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, that in many ways launched this channel just as much as Jordan Peterson did. Before the naturalist and the supernaturalist can begin to discuss their difference of opinion, they must surely have an agreed definition both of nature and of supernature. But unfortunately, it is almost impossible to get such a definition. And that was true in the middle of the 20th century when Lewis wrote this, and I think it's nearly as true today. Just because the naturalist thinks that nothing but nature exists, that's the definition of a naturalist. The word nature means to him merely everything, or the whole show, or whatever is. And if that is what we mean by nature, then of course nothing else exists. The real question between him and the supernaturalist has evaded us. Some philosophers have defined nature as what we perceive with our five senses. That's the empiricism, Galileo dropping things from a tower. But this is also unsatisfactory, for we do not perceive our own emotions in that way. And this is where we're at the beginning of patterns seeing patterns, in a Peugeotism. And yet they are presumably natural events. In order to avoid this deadlock and to discover that the naturalist and the supernaturalist are really differing about, we must approach our problem in a more roundabout way. I begin by considering the following sentences. Number 1, are those his natural teeth, or, he says, a set? Are those his natural teeth? Are they implants or dentures? Number 2, the dog in his natural state is covered with fleas. But Lewis is, of course, in some ways talking before we really had all the knowledge we have about genetics, and one would say there's absolutely nothing about natural about a domesticated dog. By definition, anything domesticated is unnatural. And if you don't believe me, get a dog that's been poorly bred and compare it to the wolf that the dog supposedly has been derived from by unnatural causes, human breeding, genetic modifications, but the old-fashioned kind that human beings have been doing for a very long time. So right there, in fact, even that sentence is disrupted by technology. The dog in his natural state is covered with fleas. 3, I love to get away from tilled land and metalled roads and be alone with nature, capital N. Ah, that's what the shrine of Yosemite National Park is. It's natural. Is it really? To fence it off and have people in uniforms keeping you from doing whatever you want in the park? In what way is a park natural? Once it's a park, it's no longer really a wilderness. 4, do be natural. Why are you so affected? Oh, there's an interesting one. In other words, go about how you normally are. Don't be changed by what someone has said or done or triggered you. There's a fun new word. 5, It may have been wrong to kiss her, but it was very natural. Ooh, now we're going to remember this whole video is about Chesterton's fence and same-sex marriage. And again, it's going to be a while till we get there. So if you want to skip to the end, which you can do on YouTube, you can already skip to the end and listen to some conclusions. But a lot of those conclusions are built on this. And this last one, it may be wrong. It may have been wrong to kiss her, but it was very natural. I saw her beauty. She looked at me in the eye a certain way. Me and Mrs. Jones. Now I'm dating myself. You can go on to YouTube and Google me and Mrs. Jones. We got a thing going on. Or Debbie Boone. It may be wrong, but it feels so right. You light up my life. More songs from the 70s. All of those things were imprinted in me at an early age. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? A common thread of meaning in all of these usages can be discovered. The natural teeth are those which grow in the mouth. We do not have to design them, and we meaning human beings. They seem to come apart from human beings monkeying around with it, unless we get at orthodontics. We do not have to design them, to make them, or to fit them. The dog's natural state is the one he will be in if no one takes soap and water and prevents it. The countryside where nature, capital N, reigns supreme is the one where soil, weather, and vegetation produce their results unhelped and unimpeded by man. Now again, given how thoroughly we have trampled on this world, is there any place in the world that actually is what we would imagine to be natural, somehow untouched by, and we really have to get into the question of untouched by exactly what? Now, C.S. Lewis in Miracles will say reason, capital R. We might say purpose, capital P. We might say intentionality. It's all of the things that we give to ourselves, but say there wasn't any kind of spirit or being or any intentional conscious thing that created this world or shaped or molded evolution with purpose. In other words, planet Earth did not have us in mind before we popped out of whatever it is we popped out of, and have at this point so completely controlled the destiny of the planet. Or have we? Because of course we have time frame to deal with. Natural behavior is the behavior which people would exhibit if they were not at pains to alter it. And again, these pains are intentionality, that, well, I put food in front of me and I will eat it. All kinds of things I will do, but then there's all of this mapping and morality inside of me that says, no, just because the bank teller is counting hundreds doesn't mean you can reach your hand through that little slot. Well, you can't do that anymore. They've really got the bank nailed down. Reach your hand through and say, I'll take the whole stack, thank you. No bother counting it. I just need it. Doesn't work. Pains to alter it. The natural kiss is the kiss which will be given if moral or prudential considerations do not intervene. Oops, I did it again, to bring things up into the musical 1980s. I'm sure those of you who listen to music today can point many other songs to me. And if you have favorite songs, drop them in the comment section. Just drop the little link to the YouTube song in the comment section and be curious what songs you want to post in there. In all the examples, nature, capital N, means what happens of itself or of its own accord. And again, we're after deism, so this isn't God working through nature. It's a far older perception. He shines through all that's fair. You can still find this in Reformed creeds and confessions. You can very much find it in historical writings. You can find it in the Bible. God number one is all over the place, working through creation. But after deism, no, that's nature. God is only God number two, the person, not God number one, the arena. God number two is the agent. The Greek word for nature, physis, is connected with the Greek verb to grow. Latin natura with the verb to be born. The natural is what springs up or comes forth or arrives or goes on of its own accord. the given, what is there already, the spontaneous, the unintended, the unsolicited. What the naturalist, capital N, meaning the philosophical naturalist, not necessarily the person who's working at Yosemite National Park, what the naturalist believes is that the ultimate fact, capital F, the thing you can't go behind, the thing you can't deconstruct, I would say, is a vast process in space and time which is going of its own accord. It has no morality. It just is. Inside that total system, every particular event, such as you're sitting, reading, or listening to this book or podcast, happens because some other events have happened. In the long run, because the total event, capital T, capital E, is happening. Every particular thing, such as this page or this word or what's coming out of your microphone, is what it is because other things are what they are. And so, eventually, because the whole system is what it is. All the things and events are so completely interlocked that no one of them can claim the slightest independence from the whole show. We've got layers of causality here. None of them exist on its own or goes on of its own accord, except in the sense that it exhibits at some particular place and time that general existence on its own. Deism, it's the clock, it's been wound up, it will go on its own. There is no God number one beneath it or around it. Or behavior of its own accord, which belongs to, now he's got nature, capital N, in square quotes, the great total interlocked event as a whole. Thus, no thoroughgoing naturalist believes in free will, for free will would mean that human beings have the power of independent action, the power of doing something more or other than what is involved by the total series of events. In other words, morality is illusion, because you're going to do what you're going to do. You can watch The Matrix, they'll send you down that rabbit hole. I guess a new Matrix is coming out. We'll see if it's any good. And any such separate power of originating events is what the naturalist denies. Spontaneity, originality, action on its own is a privilege reserved for the whole show, which he calls, capital N, italics for emphasis, nature. C.S. Lewis, Miracles. Now we have to deal with this question of two world mythologies. One of the things that in some ways Jonathan Pageau and John Vervaeke are in agreement with, even though they differ on many other things. In many ways, the difference between emanation and emergence is modernity or late modernity or post-modernity has gotten very unhappy with Cartesian dualism. What do I mean by that? Descartes imagined that not only do we have matter or physical substance that we are able to track and measure and watch and manipulate and do things with, but there must be spiritual substance out there somewhere doing things. And that division between physical substance and spiritual substance has proven to, well, it helped Descartes out of some of the messes that he was wrestling with. But it's proven to be a little bit of a problem. And so Jonathan Pageau, in many ways through his symbolism, is pushing against duality. And John Vervaeke, with his non-reductive physicalism, and just watch my conversations with him and JP and myself, is pushing against Cartesian dualism. We want one unified system through which to see the world. As C.S. Lewis said, no heel tapping. What did he mean by this? Because I believe it was one of Lewis's nannies who was an ardent spiritualist, because at the end of the 19th century, everyone was really interested in ghosts, and there were plenty of people who were playing all sorts of games, taking all sorts of money to have people encounter the ghost. So Lewis was basically pointing to that. In other words, when we get into the laboratory, we do not imagine that any spirit is about to manipulate the findings of the physical experiment. That the things in the lab will go on their own. They will not be altered. And if there is a difference between what we anticipated and what we arrived at, we ought to be able to account for that difference through some sort of physical agency or some human mind, because again, in our system, there are no minds or agents or spirits above humanity. That's non-reductive physicalism. So the spiritual substance is not available for physical examination. And, well, we do a lot of experiments in labs, and we seem fairly satisfied with a lot of what we come up with. So maybe that means there isn't anything up there. And I guess the amazing Randy still has his $1 million. I don't know. We want a single system that we can control, that we can account for, that we can manage everything with and through, that we can somehow suit this world for what we call good or morality or moral goodness. But unfortunately, we're subject to it, and this is part of the meaning crisis. I want to be its master, and I'd like to be master of you too, if my heart really gets its way. But you're like, I don't trust you that much. And you probably shouldn't. Because the problem is, I'm not exactly sure what the master of me is. Because I've got a consciousness congress, and I'm plenty conflicted, and I've got questions, and one day I feel this, and next day I do that, and the things, read Romans 7, the things that I say I shouldn't do, I do. And the things that I say I should do, I don't do. Who can save me? Well, if you don't believe in Jesus, I guess you got to save yourself. Or maybe a doctor, or maybe a guru, or maybe a pill, or maybe something else. But it's got to be within the physical realm, within this locked universe, because yourself, well, you're buffered. There's nothing that's going to impinge upon you from above. It's all been built into you within time and space, and therefore there is no God and there is no spirit above human beings. But Peugeot weighs in and says, well, wait a minute, we are patterns seeing patterns. And if you're ever driving through open country in a four-wheel and you see an animal and you want to take a picture of it and the camera's going like this, it's like, well, you can't stop the car. To stop the car would mean death. And so the camera shake is built into all of our perceptions of the world out there. We are patterns seeking patterns. And so the shake of our own patterns looking at, well, the trees seem to be shaking. No, you're shaking. The picture's all blurry. We're patterns seeing patterns, and there's two moving targets. So you've got a cheetah running across the African plain, and you've got your camera, and you're trying to keep up. And well, we have image stabilization, and yeah, that's all that stuff has limits. We are patterns seeing patterns, but the camera shake makes it hard to control my neighbor as myself, even if I have trouble controlling myself. So this two-world mapping endures. I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think, most of us are ready to say, that the spiritual substance, I'm quite certain I don't want to get rid of spiritual ontology. And in fact, a lot of my project has been attempting to map as best I can some spiritual ontology from below, such as school spirit. But it just seems a little bit hubristic to imagine that there aren't any spirits above us. And given how we see human beings relate, well, then I know this is a bone of contention. Some of you, especially if your name starts with K, really get upset at this point. Only some of you whose names start with K. I'm just thinking of a particular individual whose name starts with K. And if you're in the community, if you're in the comment community, he'll probably present himself. So we've got this issue. We've got these two worlds mapping, and they're not going away. We've got heaven, spirit, and mind, things not subject to decay that the Greeks paid a lot of attention to. And we've got earth, flesh, and matter, things subject to decay. C.S. Lewis notes that every instance of love will be ended in this world by death or betrayal. But love itself, the word, the idea, the form, the thing way up on high, love everlasting. Well, heavens are everlasting, and spirit and mind, these things don't decay. They govern, they rule, they move the trees, they're all up there. That's not going away for human beings, because now you might be skeptical in terms of the ontology of some of these things, but in terms of how they work in us psychologically, and I think this was one of the big lessons learned by the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, these things are not going away. In fact, they can't go away without us not being what and who we have come to know ourselves to be. And people trying to dismiss them seem to, as C.S. Lewis points out again and again in his book, betray themselves. And he talks about H.G. Wells. Suddenly, Sam Harris is a common one. All of this stuff is just projection. It's all between our ears. You don't act as if it is. Vulnerable to mind and spirit, yet also now via science demonstrating its power to shape minds and spirit for many deciding who get to go to heaven. In other words, well, a lot of the religious people say what you do with matter matters. For if something of you, mind, spirit, and in resurrection body, will make another appearance on this earth or the next. Well, now suddenly we're asking questions that physics really can't answer. Now, Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, he put her name first. That was very chivalrous of him. Maybe she wrote most of it. I have no idea. The last gasp of modernity is evolutionary psychology for a guide to life. And that's sort of what we've been seeing in the IDW space. Modernity is really just too handy to not keep around in one form or another. If we're not going to go into a vicious whirlpool, but rather have a virtuous spiral, well, according to the integral people, modernity is going to have to be folded into our continued journey of knowledge. And so a lot of the fruits of modernity, the imagined objectivity, are things we're going to need. We're going to have to be able to agree that at certain elevations, water boils at such and such a temperature, and water freezes at a certain temperature. And these aren't things you just throw away. They have been built into the systems that we are dependent upon. When towards the end of, I don't remember which Matrix movie it was, the Neo stands looking over these vast machines underneath Zion that are keeping the little rebel tribe alive, and whatever the dude is and whatever his post is, who waxes eloquently about how we and the machines are going to have to make peace with one another. Well, in some ways, that's sort of where we're at with nature. That can't live with her, can't live without her. Because every time it seems like we corner nature and really get her under our technological boot, we discover that nature seems to have a way of saying, oh, you think you got me now? Well, how about I heat up the planet a little and let's see how smart you are. Let's see how collectively you can make bricks and build a tower to the heavens, shall we? Since we no longer believe in letters from heaven, divine revelation, if we can discover natural man, maybe we can get beneath our tower and build it right this time. Maybe we can discover natural man and then perhaps the straight stick. What the essence of man, woman, humanity, we don't even know what to name ourselves anymore. I'm serious about that. I don't even know how to write that sentence without someone objecting. Oh, come on now. It's chest feeding, you bigot. Okay. I'm just trying to keep up. I'm not getting any younger. But because we quickly see we don't like what we're finding, we immediately claim that we can choose to ignore our genocidal spelling bee programming. This is the Brett Weinstein circular trap, where on one hand, well, now via evolutionary psychology, we can see the processes that have developed us. But then we evaluate them morally. He never tells us where he gets his moral yardstick from. We can evaluate them morally, and we can simply decide to no longer do that. There was once a Jew named Paul of Tarsus who wrote Romans 7. And his experience in Romans 7 is a pretty universal experience. The good I would do, I don't do. And the evil that I don't want to do, I do. Who can save me from myself? I don't just choose to step out of my genocidal spelling bee any more than my Windows computer isn't a Mac one day when I open up the lid. Blah, Apple logo. Not on this Lenovo. It ain't going to happen. But somehow I can just wake up and deny my genocidal spelling bee programming and decide, I know what's moral. I will go off into the world. Every time he does this, I just kind of leaves my mouth open. What is natural? But notice how authority has come into this. Authoritative, but subject to moralistic revision. This with regard to sex. Because if there's any power that seems to take over human beings, Christian or non-Christian, church leader or governor of New York or president of the United States, on down to human history, there seems to be few things more powerful than sex. I remember reading in one biography of Gautama the Buddhist, Siddhartha Gautama the Buddhist, that if he had had another desire stronger than sex, he never could have achieved enlightenment. It's the big dog. It takes how many of us down? To kiss her was so natural. This is a biggie. You're just going to transcend it? And for that reason, sort of born that way, really held the stage for a long time, even if it's passing. We can't decide what side of nature, what side of the natural, in scare quotes, line sexual desire is on. Oh, no, certainly this is hardwired. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of wiring. There's a lot of evolutionary development, too. And there's a lot of culture. It's Brett Weinstein who more eloquently than most talks about these two tracks, the genetic track and the culture track. And then he seems to forget the implications of what that has to do for morality and how he can sync it up with evolutionary psychology or biology. They're living in two different worlds. Wilfrid Sellers, that should be like, I don't know, some magic word that Expelliarmus or whatever they say in Harry Potter. We can't decide what side of the line of the natural line sexual desire, procreative activity, or mating should be on. Do we have a choice or not? Did Ravi Zachariah have a choice? Did Bill Hybels have a choice? Did Bill Clinton have a choice? Did Governor Cuomo have a choice? Brett Weinstein is also clearest that human beings have two tracks. The sex track seems all up and in both of them. I think one of Jordan Peterson's best work in 2018 was some of his stuff on Easter. Why? Well, because when he talked about sacrifice, he talked about the future. And he recognized very early on that the culture track is all up and in the genetics track by now. We have indeed been shaping each other, and even though the genetics track is very slow and the culture track is very fast, with every successive fertilized egg, we continue to tick those things along. With every new school, with every new idea, with every new book, with every new video, we continue to tick those things along, and it's deeply impacting status hierarchies, and status and mating is a very big deal. Brett knows that. Heather knows that. Jordan knows that. I think they're right. He talks sacrifice and mate selection, and nature sort of goes out the window. At least nature bereft of culture when it comes to human beings. Natural human being, singular or in community, is like searching 8 billion people for the essential human being. Go ahead and try. I'll wait. There's 8 billion of us to go through now. And some are coming in and some are leaving at the moment. Is any single human being in this world the essential, archetypal, quintessential human being? And how on earth would you tell? You've got exactly the same problem as asking, well, what should the speed of light be? Morality. Normativity. It's the quest of the essential human, or sexually or the essential human sexuality, and natural can't get you there if you want to keep human agency and the manifest image. Not going to go. Now again, what's this video about? I have to remind you because we've been going on a while. Chesterton's fence and the Christian objections to same-sex marriage. All of this stuff has been going through for a long time. So if you go to the CRC's human sexuality page, there's a lot of history. Now, my argument for many years now, if you've been listening to me for a few years, is that I don't think we would see the embrace among many non-Christian and Christian people of same-sex marriage, that whole idea, without Christianity and the Apostle Paul. Same-sex marriage is born of Christianity. Now, some of you who are watching the video will know that I have a little picture down below with a red pill and a blue pill, because a bunch of these points cut both ways. The culture war in the West is a Christendom civil war, and I was delighted when I heard Tom Holland say a similar thing. That's his definition of culture war. It's a Christendom civil war. It's the ongoing working through of... I have to deal with the subtitle of the book, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. I didn't recognize this, and I was at my Monday's meetup, and someone put Holland on one side and Peugeot on the other, and I thought, oh boy, you just made me do more thinking. But Dominion, what? Same-sex marriage is born of Christianity. There's no denying it. The only question is it orthodox or heterodox? Marcion was born of Christianity. Pelagius was born of Christianity. Arminius, Calvin, Luther, Augustine, Rob Bell. Can't think of the prosperity preacher in Houston. Just describing him that way, you all know. My best life now. Oh, those silly little mental blocks. The Apostle Paul radically reordered Roman assumptions about marriage and equality in the book of Ephesians. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he goes on, and he doesn't duplicate the verb. It carries through in Greek. Something the CRC fought a lot over between 1975 and 2004. But watch Tom Holland and Tom Wright talk about what Paul did in the Roman world. Somehow, radically, love was what the inferior did to the superior. And then when in Ephesians he says, men, love your wives as Christ loved the church, he scrambles this hierarchy, and they don't know what to do. I actually, when I was listening to Mark Driscoll talk to Justin Brierley, Driscoll, he didn't grow that church because he was an idiot and a putz. Now, he's got some character issues that caused its fall, but, there's a lot of people, myself included, who would agree with a lot of what Driscoll would say there. He wasn't anywhere near the straw man person that I had heard of, but never actually heard. That said, if he came to the Christian Reformed Church and wanted to be ordained, at this point, from what I know, he wouldn't have my vote. Anyway, people who complain about Paul and women can't recognize an upgrade when they see it, and they won't take yes for an answer. Now, you might say, well, I'm comparing Paul to, well, okay, comparing him to what? Why don't you compare him to his day and appreciate that radical equality that Jesus sets in motion, Paul begins to apply and disseminate in the Roman world? But he still has a hierarchy. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit to your husband as to the Lord. Now, if you understand their hierarchy, what Paul says is enormously subversive. Tom Holland understands that. N.T. Wright understands that. But most of us picking up our Bibles, you go, this is horrible. Well, what are we going to do with Paul? How do we read him? Do we read Paul within his context? Do we read Paul symbolically? Do we read Paul against our present context? How are we to decide? How are we to figure out what the Bible is saying? Now, basically, what happens with same-sex marriage, and again, marriage, plenty of same-sex activity, we'll talk about that in a minute, in the ancient world, but why would you marry your same-sex partner? That's just crazy. Marriage is for the creation of legitimate heirs. That's what it's for. Today, marriage, the definition, the word has been redefined. Marriage is an ideal. We're an expressive culture. We are expressing and pronouncing to the world that we have idealized our relationship and it now has a degree of sacred authority and everyone should back off because we're married. That's what it means here. Is that what it meant 2,000 years ago? Does the change in definition matter? I think it's something to keep in mind. Same-sex marriage debate is born from Christian history. Much of the communal motivational power of including and affirming same-sex marriage comes from the deep Christian moral intuition of caring for the weak. Again, Tom Holland's Dominion, that first chapter is an amazing chapter. How on earth is it that someone who is crucified as a slave would be declared to be God? Have you never read Philippians 2? To us, we just read it and it's normal. When it was written, you can hardly imagine something as unthinkable that God would come and allow himself to be murdered. When Jews and Muslims protest, we should have some respect for them. It's a really hard thing to think about. It's just familiarity for us that makes it easy. Recently, the woke preacher clips on Twitter, and I was thinking about making a commentary because here's a guy who founded, grew a mega church, went same-sex affirming, which basically destroyed the mega aspect of his church. And it's still out there, and it's a very interesting thing. But he makes a video a year ago and says the slippery slope is real. Once I opened the door to same-sex marriage, well, now we're all living our best life now and trying to get there spiritually. And it's a heck of a video to watch. And all the people that are like, oh, there's no slippery slope. This guy says, yeah, the slippery slope is real. We ended up a non-church, and now he's a non-preacher. And the little group of people that he gathered together, well, their website is very interesting. And again, I thought of playing a clip from it. It just seems this is down. Well, maybe I will now through the miracle of YouTube.
We became the largest evangelical, open and affirming church. And from there, we really made a lot of shifts. And all of a sudden, I think we were something like a progressive Christian church. I don't know what we ended up, a not church or some sort of interfaith spiritual goulash. The slippery slope is real.
This is Ryan Meeks, founder of Church of Seattle. 2015, he announced that East Lake would be queer affirming, comparing the Bible's teaching of sexuality to Jim Crow. This brought the church much positive national press from Time magazine, Upworthy, plus others. The faith community can evolve. As he announces retirement, he rejoices. And actually, the whole YouTube video is really quite interesting to listen to.
But I think back of the many, many iterations of what Eastlake has been. I mean, you think about any point in time. At one point, you could have called us a tiny fledgling church plant, and then we were a purpose-driven church health award winner in 2006, and
So, he goes through, a bunch of stuff that I'll probably get to in other videos. He goes through the whole seeker thing.
We were one of Outreach Magazine's fastest growing churches in America, and we were a multi-site evangelical mega church, and we were a hologram church. That didn't work. That's one of the funny ones. At one point, we became the largest evangelical, open and affirming church. I cannot bear to move forward in my life a part of a faith community where my friends are not welcomed.
See, and that is, so again, back to high on God. This is deeply part of evangelicalism, this soft inclusion. This is deeply part, and this mercy for the sexual minorities in our midst that feel this way through no fault of their own. That's powerful and compelling.
To both serve and receive communion, have equal welcome into the community of Christianity, of following Jesus. From this point forward, we're going to keep doing what we've always done as we aim for Jesus, as we aim for the embodiment of the kingdom among us, reconciliation, renewal, and restoration for the flourishing of all people.
Why can't we just change that one little thing? Surely that won't make a big difference. Or maybe the reason it makes a big difference is because of the bigotry of the masses. Maybe they're insufficiently evolved, or maybe they're not sufficiently moved by the Spirit of God, or maybe they're too old and we just have to wait for a generation for them to all die out and let all of the young people who have been raised on the media of today who will think nothing of it. I don't know.
That's where we're headed, to Jesus, to the kingdom.
That's not quite where they got, though.
To the beauty and the work of Christ in all things. And from there, we really made a lot of shifts, and all of a sudden, I think we were something like a progressive Christian church, and then we were a rapidly declining church, and I don't know what we ended up, a not church or something. We became...
So, the whole thing is just fascinating. And again, I'll put the link to the whole video in there, because basically, this is his goodbye talk to the church, because he's not doing it anymore. So then, of course, I wanted to find the church. So, all right, we'll go.
Part of my...
So then you can go down to East Lake, and then they've got their current services. And right at the beginning of all of their current videos, they have their little promo about who their church is.
Welcome to Eastlake. We are an inclusive faith community dedicated to the free search for truth and meaning.
And again, all these things I could say. These are my estuary groups in some ways, the free search of truth and meaning. Well, absolutely, I'm down, I'm in. You would think that if you put this out there, people will rush to it, right?
To live out a more just and life-giving spirituality.
It's so funny when you show images like this, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Are you really secular? Have you really stripped away all of the religious, crustaceans that have gone to your hull? Or are you just nervous about the Christian ones, and the other ones are chic and cool and we can let those in? It's just marketing after all, isn't it?
In the modern world, we see faith as less about doctrines and dogmas demanding total agreement, but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
And again, you could, if someone had the desire to do so, I am 100% certain you could go through and find all these little catchphrases of things that I've said. Isn't Christianity not a list of propositions, but a life lived out? The dude in 2015 said they're just making this tiny little change, but now, well, this is the change.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is a gift and love is the point.
And again, all of the language has been sort of, well, It isn't a gift from God or the God of the Hebrews. Or, I mean, you got to get rid of all of that, because then you're excluded. And see, at some point, and this is where a lot of the other videos are saying, well, there is an essence to your new church. Is it Christ, or is it something you got to through Christ? Or at least the Christ that you had. And Christ eventually became incidental to this other thing that you were chasing.
We welcome life is a gift, and love is the point. We welcome the entire human family, regardless.
See, and this is, when people talk like this is when the inner troll comes out, because it's like, I am very close to people I could send to your church, and you would not want them there for more than 15 minutes, and you surely wouldn't want them opening their mouths. If all means all, I hope you're ready for all, because I've got names.
Regardless of race, age, creed, physical abilities, marital or economic status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So,
What was that on her nose?
gender identity or sexual orientation.
Why is her nose a different color? It might just be a mistake. I'm just curious, and maybe someone in the comment section will say, no, that's because, and then you teach me about some new thing that I can't possibly know.
So if you are curious and have come to see, if you are tired and have come to rest, if you are grateful and have come to share, if you are journeying and have come to grow, if you are wounded and have come to heal, if you are joyful and have come to shine, welcome home.
That is well done. They put a lot of time and a lot of work to put something quite that slick. I mean, branding, marketing. I mean, you just captured the zeitgeist in a really, it's a minute. That's hard. That's really hard. And, mega churches have gotten really good at this. And so, as I said in my equity, justice versus merciful accommodation, what starts out as just human mercy, and someone's like, I find this often with some people who are, well, shouldn't we care for them? But very quickly, people turn around and say, hey, I don't want to be the object of your charity or mercy. I deserve justice. I deserve acknowledgement. I deserve equity. So I don't want your stinking charity. Okay. And quite frankly, most of the time they don't want your stinking church either. If you're calling sexual minorities the weak, and that was an argument that I have plenty of books on the subject. Well, these are the weaker brothers. Oh, well, that's not equality, is it? Where this sort of goes in terms of a hermeneutic of suspicion. I'm not saying anything about Nick. Nick was absolutely delightful here, but what I hear cynically from people is the naive mythology of mean old white dead Christian tyrannical church leaders. That's why Chesterton's fence is there. They wanted to control the bodies of gay people. They wanted to control bodies. They wanted to control bodies. Well, I like controlling my body. I haven't found myself terribly successful at controlling the bodies of anyone else. And it's sort of a subtraction story that gets told. Why can't the CRC just stop fighting about same-sex marriage? Back before we had science and stuff, we thought gay people were sex addicts and child molesters. Some of these guys wrote the Bible from that bigoted posture, but now because of science and nice Jesus and stuff, we know that we were wrong, that they were wrong, and so we can dismiss what they wrote and finally, progressively, get closer to the eschaton. That's a rather cynical articulation of generally speaking, the most common argument I hear from people. It's not so much an argument, it's much more sort of a justification. It's 2021 for Pete's sake, as if the calendar tells us what we should do. Sometimes it does. Plant your crops. How did these ideas get written into the Bible in the first place? That's kind of a hard question. And I don't think anybody has a good answer for that. And this is exactly where we get to Chesterton's fence, because here we find this fence, here we find these 7 clobber texts, and here we have Genesis 1, which I think is the foundational text. Now, a new atheist would say that's arbitrary, uninformed, motivated by bigotry. But where does the bigotry come from? Why? Well, it's just obvious because I see bigotry all around me. Yeah, but you're living now. Don't you have to find this bigotry 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago? Isn't that the project of evolutionary biology and psychology? Is the bigotry natural? But now we're sort of into Brett Weinstein's circular trap again. If it is natural, well, then we can just step out of it. Just like my Lenovo computer is going to step out of the Windows operating system and one day say, nope, it's Mac today, Paul. I don't think I'm going to see that. I think I can turn this computer on every day until the computer or I die, and it will be Windows every time. That's what we mean by programming. Was this fence of use in the past? That's a good question. And I have heard zero. Now, I haven't heard everything, obviously, so let me know in the comment section. I've heard 0 people answer that question. I want to know. I've got some ideas, actually. To evaluate the fence, you first need to understand its history, where it came from, even if you're talking within the whole show. Here's an idea that I've had. In human times, in earlier times, when tribal population growth was so essential for the power against rivals, was same-sex sexuality a luxury good that was seldom afforded? In other words, just read the book of Samuel or the book of Judges. The wife, why was the wife who has many sons celebrated? Well, because those many sons daughters are good too, but sons can work in the field. Sons can wield swords. Sons can tend at the gate. Sons can keep the Midianites and the Philistines from raiding your camp, if at least we get Iron Age technology. Sons can decide whether or not the family thrives over time. Sons and human muscle power is really, really important. And if we out-procreate your tribe, we will dominate you and, genocidal spelling bee of the genetic code, we, in fact, will inherit the earth. Those who procreate inherit the earth. This is an idea that has nearly completely fallen out of favor in terms of weird people. Weird, Western, educated, industrial, on and on. I didn't write it down. I don't remember. The R. Democratic is the D. The R. Someone will write it in the comment section or it'll bubble up in my brain a few minutes from now. Procreation was a matter of life and death for your culture-verse tribe. And same-sex sexuality is basically wasted. And someone who is only having sex or doing sexual things with a member of the same sex, you can do those things until the cows come home, and you are not going to have a son. You are not going to have a baby. You can see this in the Bible. Hannah cries to her husband, or her husband says to Hannah, am I not worth 5 sons to you? Peninnah is lording it over Hannah. Hannah says no, and so she goes to the tabernacle and weeps bitter tears. And the Lord hears her cry and gives her a son, and she does the audacious thing of giving him back to the Lord. What's all that coming out of? It's coming out of the realization that it is be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the earth, up to and including your neighbors, or you're going to be a sad note of history. And in fact, the really good genocides are the ones that have left no record. When the Europeans got to the Americas, they discovered the winners of all the genocides. Because all the other genocidal groups, well, what are these groups? Well, all these other groups we track culturally. Because if you take out the culture layer, you look around and say, well, Homo sapiens. One is as good as another, I guess, just like the mice in the field, unless now suddenly you're labeling them and differentiating them and you have an endangered species list. That we don't work that way. The greatest threat in the ancient world was to be cut off. Does same-sex sexuality make any sense in that world? Maybe that's a source of the bigotry. I don't know. That's just one I thought of. I've never read it in a book. I've never thought of it at all. It makes sense to me. Is it true? We can't test it in a lab. It seems plausible, but maybe that's the source of bigotry. And maybe today, well, we seem to have enough people. But then again, let's just imagine that all of the everyone who votes for the Democratic Party stops having babies, and everyone who votes for the Republican Party keeps having babies. Do you think that'll have any impact in the elections of 2040? Who's to say? Palestinians and Jews, Africans and Europeans. Westerners have just sort of said, making babies isn't important anymore. There seems to be lots of us. We need fewer people in the world. Oh, okay. Are you volunteering to get off? Well, maybe if they blast me into space to Mars, how many volunteers do we have for that one-way Mars mission anyway? I mean, this thing gets weird quickly. And I'm not someone who believes that, people should start having babies. I am someone who believes that overpopulation or, I don't know. Read The Alchemy of Air. At the beginning of the First World War, there was a real crisis. And at least in The Alchemy of Air, whatever scientist put that math together said, well, maybe the carrying capacity of the world optimally was 3.5 or 4 billion people. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was less than that. And part of the reason Germany was in trouble and looked longingly at Poland and Ukraine and Belarus was its land was so poor and worn out. And why was that little war fought in South America next to the coast? For bat droppings, the Great Bat Droppings War. Well, because they needed fertilizer. And then suddenly you have the fixation of air, and we can draw nitrogen from the air because we're surrounded by nitrogen and not a drop to put in the soil. And now you can fix nitrogen, and now we've got nitrogen all over the place, and we can refresh fields, and we can blow up buildings in Oklahoma City. There's a lot going on here. In the ancient world, for them to say, just the productive orifice, please. There's a just so story, I suppose, but I've never heard anybody tell it. Maybe that's Chesterton's fence. I don't know. Is it? Answering the natural question always leads round to the Weinstein circular trap. It can't tell you whether or not it is moral unless you assume morality is fundamentally an instrumental adaptation for the genocidal spelling bee. And then once again, you no longer have morality. We only developed morality so we could outcompete our neighbors. Wait, then Jesus' morality really seems strange. Because no, you're supposed to love your neighbor. And in fact, the Christian story has a man who says he's God, dying for his enemies. That doesn't seem anywhere aligned with this genocidal spelling bee at all. You lose morality, in other words. The morality maps onto heaven, spirit, mind all the time psychologically for us. It's just right. Oh, is it right now? Alvin Plantinga, Veritas Forum just published a little clip of Alvin Plantinga basically in short sentence completely disrupting moral relativism because it's this classic Alvin Plantinga move. Once you make the statement that morality is relative, well, you've just mapped onto heaven, spirit, mind. You've just broken the rule you're trying to establish. Either morality is or it isn't. Those are the only two options. Because it maps onto heaven, spirit, mind, eternally, psychologically. It's just right. It's always been right. It's never been right to eat your children. Well, what if you're starving in the Ukraine because Stalin has, taken all the grain for the cities? It's still never right. And when you listen to Brett Weinstein declare his ability to go from Windows to Mac overnight, you'll never get me to do that. Oh, okay. And hey, I'm not doubting you. Lots of people have been stubborn like that in history, and we count them as moral heroes. But the whole idea of morality begs heaven, spirit, mind, eternality. That's the mode that we go into mentally. It's wrong, and it always will be. And it doesn't matter what it would get me. It's always, always wrong. That's the game we're playing. So give up on that dream, and you lose humanity. C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man. But then, how can we account for the Bible? Because if we do this, usury. When Jesus says, if they ask for your cloak, give it to them. Well, I'll give you my cloak, but I want your cloak. I want my cloak back, and I want a shekel. And then I'll give you my cloak. John Calvin says, no, because they need your cloak, you should give them the cloak out of mercy. But if you say, I want a talent of gold, and I'm going to invest it, and I'll return your talent of gold, you say, hey, wait a minute. You're going to earn money from my talent of gold. Why don't you give me a talent of gold and a little bit of interest besides? Jesus tells a parable about that, doesn't he? Maybe we have to account for the Bible. Isn't that sort of what I'm asking from this video? Give me an account. Tell me. Show me Chesterton's fence with respect to this argument. Now, this is modern biblical scholarship, and if you want a really amazing demonstration of it, watch Christine Hayes's lectures from Yale University on the Bible. Now, warning, it's only going to be the Hebrew Bible. It's not going to be the New Testament, and she'll explain why. But she goes through and will walk through the various sources, the thinking behind it, the community, Ezekiel Kaufman, Israelite religion, biblical religion, the Deuteronomists. It's an amazing presentation that she walks through. But recognize what she's doing. She's deconstructing this. And in a sense, it is in some ways just the legacy of Luther, because the Bible doesn't come from above so much. But, Luther, this stuff gets complicated. It's a product of the whole show. Unless we fudge by saying the Bible of faith. Well, this is the Jesus of faith. You can find that on PBS. And that's sort of like, Hail Descartes. We have the substance down below and the substance above. And it's like, hey, wait a minute. Did you just snuggle in the discarded image, Rene Descartes? You just called it spiritual substance and put it somewhere other than above the moon. Surely different communities were in conflict. I'm sure they were. But what is the source of their conflicts? Evolutionary psychology, geography, natural resources, psychology. Is it about fruitless sex versus sex that makes babies that can grow crops and win wars? Is that the reason? Again, how can these questions be answered? And again, evolutionary psychology will not give you evolutionary morality. It can't. So, let me make sure I didn't skip a thing. Women in office, same-sex marriage. What were the biblical authors thinking and why? And I'm not one to say that that's unimportant. If you want to read the Bible and interpret the Bible, what was the authorial intent is an important thing to look at. And historical questions matter. And so, yeah. But then we kind of get lost in the trap of the quest for the historical Bible, because, we have the Bible of history and the Bible of faith. We got another Cartesian dualism here. Now, the too long don't read it is sort of what we do because, sexuality in the New Testament, just on CRC Voices. We got some really smart people on CRC Voices, and they give me great ideas, and they give me good book references as if I didn't need to buy more books. Understanding the Key Text by William Loader. He's in the affirming camp. Well, then I'm not going to read it. Well, he's in the traditional camp. Oh, I'm going to be all over it. Well, why? Well, because I like to have my biases confirmed. Oh. Is he for it or against it? That's all I need to know. So I can keep up my tribal reading chart up to date. But then there's the ancient world. And again, part of what's made Tom Holland so fascinating to watch is, boy, Thermopylae. The Greeks versus the Persians. In these little books where I saw those noble Spartans standing up against Persia, and Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, and Tom Holland says, well, America's kind of the Persians, really. What's going on there? And the more he digs in, well, sort of in the Victorian era, when they found Pompeii in the modern era, they, took all the sex stuff and put it in a warehouse because can't have people thinking the Romans were pervs, that they had pornography all over the place. Can't think that. One can't be too careful in their reading or their archaeology because, well, the ancient world liked to get it on. So, the Apostle Paul didn't know any committed same-sex couples. Well, he certainly didn't know any gay marriages because that would have been unthinkable. And the whole idea of marriage in the ancient world was very different from marriage in our world, and. So someone points me to Plato's Symposium, and I read the relevant texts, and, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I should read some more of this. So start at the beginning, and, Socrates is going down to the wrestling club, and, they're all going to talk about love and parental love and all sorts of love. But, hey, anybody have any crushes in here? They're all boys. It's those youths. Those youths are not really kind of people. We think our children are people, but the ancient world, they're sons and daughters. Here's the thing. It's really hard to mind read and imagine ourselves in their thought processes when, again, we've got earth, flesh, matter, and heaven. Keep my order right. Heaven, spirit, mind. And there's a lot that goes into this. And we know that, you find in the Symposium all these things about, well, before they get whiskers. Well, the Romans had a thing about hair. They didn't like hair. And if you know anything about how the Romans sort of bathed, you'd put oil on and you get a scraper and you scrape off the dirt. And Romans, well, just look at the art. Look at David, just hair nicely on top of the head, maybe a little bit below, but Greek ideal, well, once we start getting whiskers, they start getting white and we start decaying and, but we like our people undecayed, carved in marble, beautiful, youthful, ideal. That's their whole worldview put together in some ways. Art always is an expression of that. Sex and general morality was vastly different from our own. There's a terrific, I was reading an article on the internet from Harvard about, sexuality in the Symposium, and it's pretty wild stuff because, they're talking about the poet and his lover as one of the sections. And he says, this chasing after youths before they start growing beards, that isn't the best kind of love. A better kind of love is once they come into manhood. And then, they approach these things the whole time in different ways from us. And no Christianity to contaminate it. No Judaism in sight. It's just people. But then again, was that normal? Oh, I'm sorry. Normativity. There we are again. Well, anthropology will answer the question if we extend the data set. Part of the reason we have the histories we have is because one of the few ways we can get into the minds of people who've been dead a long time is if they could write. Our two worlds mythology mapping continues to dog us. We want to know the mind of the past, and if we know their mind, we'll have a sense of their morality, not just the matter and how they left it, and whatever remains, remains. And unless we have a lot of writing, and you know what? Having a lot of writing isn't necessarily helpful, because the more, if they just have a little bit of writing, then we just keep projecting onto it. But if they have a lot of writing and we keep reading it, well, then we realize just how distant they are. Now we're back to Tom Holland land. We realize the speed of mind and how it changes, and the limitations of reading ancient minds over the gap. And that, of course, keeps academia and scholarship really fun. We can have new, interesting, insightful, refreshed, creative ideas about what exactly they were thinking and why they were crushing on the youths, and how they regarded boys and how they regarded girls and what their morality was. Just read the symposium. It's Plato, it's Socrates, it's great stuff to read, but you start reading it and you have this kind of thing in mind and you begin like, oh, wow. Do we really want to go back there? I mean, that's Tom Holland's crisis. Is that really? Well, we have morality now. From where? To what degree is human sexuality nature and nurture? Oh, we've used those categories for a while, but our resolution is far too high to really have those boxes be so discrete. Can you answer this question? What can this duality tell you about morality? We've got Jonathan Haidt and moral taste buds, and C.S. Lewis intuitions, and Brett and Heather doing evolutionary biology and making statements about, well, what we find is really ugly, but we'll go from Windows to Mac just like this. Our sexuality seems far more complex and fluid than anything else we find in the animal kingdom, in nature, which should indicate that it has culture track all over it to a degree that we have no idea, especially because how far back do we really have writing? These are not questions we are going to answer. For the most part, most Christian progressives argue as such. Imagine the line can be held at two people for life instead of male-female for life. That's sort of where this megachurch pastor went. Okay, let's just start with communion, made by usually aging weird Westerners. Now, you have to keep your eye on the patterns, looking for the patterns. And my eyes on the patterns are watching them. And so there's a lot of shaking going on. And what I've noticed is that for the older generation, this makes perfect sense, because if you read, for example, the 1973 report from the Christian Reformed Church, it's very much tilted in terms of born that way. Because before that, there was a regime of, well, it's because they weren't mothered properly or something like that. And so, it was the mother's fault or the father's fault that their kid was gay, because that was nurture. And so what we usually do is we overreach each time. And so it's all nurture, and then it's all nature. It's all nature. They're just born that way. And born that way really sort of kind of cleaned up the playing field because, well, and suddenly, because the civil rights movement was happening, metaphors responding to race relations, which I have known not a few black folks who find the appropriation of the civil rights movement in this cause rather offensive. Because they say, when I walk into a room, there ain't no covering my skin color and the history of oppression that has gone on and the bigotry and all of those layers there of morality. So, really? You're going to really compare this to the lynchings of Jim Crow? Ooh, moral equivalence. Oh, Paul, don't do that. Don't go there. But born that way is going away. And Andrew Sullivan, for example, isn't happy it is. And, part of the reason he writes what he writes is he's saying, they're destroying everything I tried to build, and it hasn't been in U.S. law for a decade yet. What's supplanting it is the secret sacred self, because we already have a sense. Remember, evolutionary psychology and biology is the last gasp of modernity. What comes after modernity? Well, it's the one thing, your religion is what you won't deconstruct. Your religion is what you can't deconstruct. The one thing that I can't deny, it's a new Cartesianism, is my lived experience. Okay, but living goes through time. So when are you what? Well, what's authentic to me is how I feel it mirrors my secret sacred self. And that secret sacred self is always evolving. Well, that makes some sense, if you think about it, because the zeitgeist is evolving and you're aging and there's lots of patterns going on and it's really hard to find each other. But Born This Way is going away. And we've had a time, it's sort of like, winter and summer. We had a time when, your gay kids are your mama's fault or your daddy's fault. And then we had a time with, your gay kids are the fault of your dead relatives and all the genetics that got, or it's birth order, or it's the amount of testosterone that the baby was, it's your body. And so it's involuntary, it's natural. Okay. And again, I'm not skeptical about anything. I don't know this. I just read it. But now it's like, no, but just like going from Mac to Windows, you can evolve. It's not only your right, it's your duty to continue to mirror the secret sacred self, to self-construct and manifest that which is true for you now. So, but the old guard still assumes a rather static human sexuality of, let's say, 95% people locked in as hetero and 3 to 5% same-sex attracted or bi. But now, how does this work in history? Well, why was the Julio-Claudian dynasty so queer? I mean, again, I read Dynasty over my last break, and Claudius, that strange man, only liked having sex with women. Didn't he understand that penises were for pleasure, procreation, and power? That's what a penis is for. Come on, Claudius, get with the program. Sleeping with only girls. You don't know how to really run an administration. You probably were murdered by, let's see, I got to remember which one we're down to. Nero. Why couldn't the rest of here's the Chesterton fence question. Why couldn't the rest of the church recognize the goodness of the 3% of gay couples in the church in the first century who were filled with the Spirit? I've been going through the book of Acts, and this revolution in terms of the question of circumcision is so profound. I mean, it grips the book of Galatians, and in many ways, it's one way to understand the sort of the shape of the book of Acts. If you could overturn circumcision and you have at least 3 to 5% of the people around you living without stigma in the Roman Empire, from whence comes the bigotry against gays? Tell me, show me, tell me why to take down Chesterton's fence. I'll listen to you, because for me, in many ways, I would love nothing better. I really would. Because it would make my life in Northern California with the friends I have and with the church that I'm trying to help survive, it would seem to make it a whole lot easier. But everything that I look at, when I look at it, says, And I find the advocates of evangelical same-sex marriage, frankly, lazy. What do you mean lazy? They've made all those books. I know. But you need some new arguments, because some of the real arguments I don't think you've dealt with. And this is one of them. Where are the same-sex couples that Paul affirms? No, he didn't affirm them because he didn't know. Oh, because things had changed. Oh. If they could overturn circumcision, then the obviousness of the goodness of gay Christians filled with the Spirit should have been evident enough. Now, I'll give you the best Christian argument because I've got a consciousness Congress, and there are days when it's like, I mean, I wrestled through this on my blog years ago, and I wrote different posts, and I remember when I wrote the post was like, there are days that I feel like, oh, just forget this fight. Just affirm and fly the flag and move on, and my life would be so much easier. The best Christian same-sex marriage argument, as I see it, is you've got to ride the Pauline egalitarian train all the way to the present. Make a pragmatic population control argument. Well, maybe. You know, the stigma against same-sex couples was because they needed population growth in order for a community to survive. So it's sort of a biological evolutionary argument. So you take egalitarianism, you take that argument, and perhaps add some speculation about no marriage and being given in marriage in the eschaton from Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. Boom, there you go. Why would I give you that argument? I think it's the best one that I've heard. Why haven't you given me a better one? Maybe I'm giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and so some who are on the traditional side of this argument aren't going to like this section of the video. But if you're at least an hour plus, I don't know how long this video has been into it, you probably pretty much know I'm like this. But there's still a lot going against it. And I had 3+ hours in my Why Marriage Equality Means the Death of the Protestant Churches. And our psychology is too weird to help in many ways. We don't know enough. We don't have enough of the ancient world. You can't do the math. I think it's just giving us false signals. And I hear what thing, and I'm selective about it. But I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not any of those things. But me, like how many of us, have to somehow make our own mind because, well, here's the question of the day. Genesis and sexual dimorphism is a really tough thing to get over. I'm just saying. Men and women are different. Are we only different because of culture? Well, if you listen to Brett and Heather, again, one of the little tidbits, I love listening to them. I like those guys. Well, why are men bigger and stronger than women? Well, that, Brett says, is perhaps because in ancient populations, males competed with other males for sex. And so the men would be larger. Sounds reasonable to me. I don't know. Here we are. We got to make a choice. Christian God of redemption is the God of creation. There's no good God and evil God. There's no good God who created heaven, spirit, mind, and an evil God who created earth, flesh, matter. Give that up, and I think you give up Christianity. Were our low rates of same-sex behavior a result of generations of stigma? Was that a positive thing? Now, the downsides, of course, are the suffering that have been highlighted in the debate over the last 50 years. And I think they've won the day. I think we no longer want to stigmatize. We want to accept into our community as this is how they are. They didn't choose this way, but born this way? Well, sort of, but it's more complicated than that. So what do we do about it? That's really hard. And neither am I was hoping for more from the Human Sexuality Report, but any report by committee is a really hard thing. And there's just sort of variable positions to deal with in that. Do you take sort of the hard line position? Hard line positions are in of themselves not bad things to go. We have hard line positions in our society about a whole range of things, and I'm glad they're there. Softer positions aren't bad either, because human sexuality is variable and people do evolve and we should have mercy. And how on earth should the church regulate all of this stuff? That's the question. Are we starting to see tremors of a transitional stage with massive gender dysphoria? This concerns me. because maybe the stigma just sort of corralled people into channels. We had the really big one and the really little one, but we've known human sexuality is very fluid and very subject to all sorts of variations, and we don't even I suspect we just don't know the half of it. But maybe that basically 2-channel system was a good one. Well, now we're going to blow up that binary. We have no idea where this goes. We really don't. And that on top of how many other technological disruptions, it's a scary world. Conflict, and I'm going to use this word in scare quotes, is natural. And those of you who watch my rough drafts for Sundays, and especially if you keep up with the sermons on the church channel, the progressive cruciform nature of Christian revelation through the church. I believe that, in fact, we learn as the church goes forward. And I subscribe and believe in the divinity of Christ. As many have said, you find the Trinity in solution in the Bible. It's not there as such. The church comes up with it later. Oh, you're Protestant. Well, yeah, I'm the kind of Protestant I am. I'm not a wholly different religion. I'm just saying there's some things that Protestants would like to continue to have ongoing dialogue with the Roman Catholics. And let's throw the Orthodox in while they're here now. But over time, we learn. And hopefully, this is something we will learn through. Over time, people drop. And then the progressive Christianity and the generation of luxury moral religion. And again, I'm working on the George Yancey book and thinking about doing commentary on that Sean McDowell, George Yancey conversation because, well, you've got the spreading apart of conservative Christianity and progressive Christianity. And chances are good one is going to drop the label. And I think actually one side has been dropping the label for 100 years. And that doesn't mean that there isn't plenty of conservative Christianity deconstructing. No, there's plenty of that too. And it doesn't mean that conservative Christianity isn't changing all the time in ways that they're not even conscious of. No, that's evident to me too. And I apply that to the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox as well. It's all a very live scene. Over time, people drop the Christian label and disappear into the contemporary cultural background noise. They stop fighting. They stop caring. The church is an obsessive curator. It's one of its largest adaptive advantages. Part of the reason I continue to promote that people, in fact, become Christians and commit to churches is because actually I think in the West this has been one of the most profitable ways by which we can not only pass through conflict but do so productively because we're leaving so many ideas of mind out there in the world for our descendants to be able to go back and think, well, what was Paul Vanderklay thinking? I'll be judged by history. But again, I'm also a conservative Christian who believes I'll be judged by my God. And that my history will go on after my hopefully loving family puts me in the grave. And I'll answer to my God for this video and for all the other videos that I've made. That's a scary thought. Where there's much talk, there's much sin. I've talked a lot. The good news is that this too will be sorted out one way or another, to one degree or another. The bad news is we'll all be dead, unless you believe in the resurrection, in which you'll just be gone from this world. And maybe we'll know more when we get to the other side. In some ways, Protestantism is working as designed. Well, designed? Or did we just kind of fall into this? What do I mean? You have differentiation of experimental tribal communities taking radically different stands on a variety of issues in real time. The Roman Catholics tend to do it all in-house. They have their orders and monasteries, and their dynamics are different. And the Orthodox, they're different too. I don't know enough about them to comment on them. But what Protestantism basically does is you have this whole laboratory of experimental communities. And so you got the PCUSA trying the affirming thing. And the United Methodists are fighting over it. And the CRC, well, it's our turn to step up to the plate, and here we are. You're just at the plate for a few decades. Will this kill the CRC? I don't know. Will it birth another denomination? Well, it has in the RCA, the Alliance of Reformed Churches, or reformedalliance.org, whatever they are. My friends Dan Ackerman and Tim Vink leading that. So yeah, lots of stuff is happening. But Protestantism is kind of working as it's always worked. And it's a mess, but we're playing with it. And when you look at the Eastlake guy who resigns from ministry on YouTube, he's out down in Escondido. He's in Escondido or he's in Ensenada. I think he's in Mexico. And he's talking about the new path that he's going to take. Well, this is Protestantism. This is how it works. And it's a mess. Consumerism is working. You get to choose which team to join. And you get to change your mind and opt out of one and into another, and you get to deconstruct, and you get to do all those things. That's working too. In a few centuries, we'll see what churches are left standing and what they believe and what they look like and what their practices are. That's the way this works. That's the way it always has worked. Maybe the Reformed and the Orthodox have some points, the Lindy effect. And we see Protestants being flailed about and the Roman Catholics like, are you going to ordain women? Are you out of your mind? And you've got guys like Jamie Smith at Calvin that says, I'd love to be Roman Catholic, but I can't deal with their stance with women in office. Okay, well, consumerism, Protestantism, Americans love to have choice, and America is all about the Protestants, and Protestants really love America, whether they fly a flag or not. They love the choices it has. And of course, you've got some of that in Britain and Canada and Australia and the Netherlands and Germany and all of the places y'all listen to me from. So here we are. We're doing it. We're riding the wave. We're in the middle of it. But my challenge to All One Body and my friends and those on Voices, I've raised this challenge all the time, is Chesterton's fence. Tell me why the barrier was put up, and we'll have a better idea of why it can be taken down. Was the barrier put up because those tribes in Israel needed to multiply and have lots of sons, and so same-sex activity was stigmatized? Was that why Onan was stigmatized? Is that why you had all of these other things? I mean, you can tell me that story. I won't yell at you. But nobody seems to be interested in that. We seem to be marching to the eschaton, and we all just seem to know this is right, except, of course, the other side that says, we know it's wrong. Okay, well, let's have a better conversation. I think, generally speaking, the burden of proof should be on the change side. But we don't seem to do that either. Protestant churches tend to be democracies of such. And if you have enough people gain the idea together, whether they got the idea from will and grace or from watching the suffering of their gay brother, they still get to vote. And they vote for pastors. And pastors keep their eye on the flock, and on and through, and this is the way we go. Account for Chesterton's fence. Account for Chesterton's fence, and you have my attention. More than imagining that MF4L, male-female for life, to two people for life, is an inconsequential adjustment. I'm looking at the data. You know, the Eastlake guy comes up, and it's like, that's data. That's data. Trying to use social bullying backed by Western implicit Protestant consumer liberationist imperialism. There's some fun words for you. That doesn't impress me. I guess I'm stubborn, but I'm also open-minded, and so I've challenged a couple of CRC ministers who are more on the progressive end. If they want to join me in a conversation, I'm happy to do so. Now I know it's my channel, and they might get shellacked in the comment section, and who knows what would happen, but my conversation with Nick was absolutely lovely. I didn't know who he was going into it. He was just a rando that sent me a lot of emails. And so finally, because he said, you sounded a little annoyed when I suggested we have a conversation. Well, I wasn't really annoyed. I wasn't annoyed at having a conversation with you. I just sometimes don't know what to do with all the requests for conversations because, like a crazy man, I basically let anybody onto my channel. But I like being crazy, so I have to deal with the consequences. So, yeah, let me know. Where's Chester? Satisfy Chesterton's fence. I think you would forward the conversation and forward the debate. Now, the Christian Reformed Church is going to have a vote at Synod 2022, I imagine. And like we usually do, we'll make decisions and we'll live with the consequences. And whether it holds together or doesn't hold together, I have no idea. But I don't want to go into fall 2022 not having at least done what I could for us to have a better conversation and a better discussion. So I don't know how long this video was, but thanks for watching. Leave a comment. Love to know what you think.